get started here today. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Living One. My name is Olivia, and I'm so glad to welcome all of you here today. For those of you who don't know, Living One is Krulos's monthly webinar series, now in its 6th year. With guest speakers from around the world, we listen in to how people are bringing their ethics, minds, and lives into alignment with nature for earth and animal liberation and revitalization. Our second series of 2025, Encounters with the Unseen, delves into the critical, ethical, and ontological dimensions emerging from non-duality and our existence in a world of persons, only some of whom are human. Over the course of this series, 6 speakers discuss their experiences with and exploration of the less than obvious, often non-material worlds. Journey with us into unseen territories and discover how this deeper understanding can expand and restore wholeness and connection with the vitality of our living cosmos. Our guest today is Carlos Perelman. Carlos is a quantum theorist who graduated from the Institute of Technology of Massachusetts and received a doctorate in physics from the University of Texas at Austin. Carlos's work on extended relativity in Clifford spaces was recognized by academia as well as the international press, and his work earned him a nomination for an award from the Peter Gruber Foundation. His contribution to the Riemann conjecture has raised interest in academic circles. His main research areas are the extended relativity theory in Clifford spaces, Born reciprocal relativity, gravity, strings and membranes, grand unification, fractals, quantum field theory, and mathematical physics. He has written 235 articles, a large majority published in various journals. Included in his work is the co-authored book, Against the Tide, a critical review by scientists of how physics and astronomy get done, called A Classic Critique on the Political Manipulation of Research, which falsifies and distorts scientific veracity and integrity. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various Indigenous lands. I am currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Krulo Center for Nonviolence is located on the homelands of the grizzly bear, Takelma, Daku Bedite, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. Finally, we ask that all of us participate with full respect and attention to each other in the spirit of peace and wisdom that Living One seeks to foster. So without further ado, we welcome Izzy and Carlos.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. And Carlos, it's going to be such a pleasure to finally get to some understanding of what has been to me in the opaque world of quantum physics. So to start with, how did you begin? How did you start out? What was it that attracted you to physics broadly, and what has kept you enamored with the discipline?
Well, actually, I see that I have my friend Fernando Lopez, who is joining me from Madrid, Spain. So at that time, I was living in Spain. And I think actually it was in 1971, I was, since I liked mathematics and physics a lot, at that time I was studying engineering at the Polytechnic of Madrid in Spain. So what attracted me to physics really was due to an LSD experience, a psychedelic experience, and that I used to have with some of my friends, and Fernando was one of my companions, actually. So at that time, I guess we had what they call window pane and blotters from Amsterdam. So I did have actually one time a very mystical experience with LSD. I mean, usually, of course, after I took LSD, after 30 minutes, you begin to get when you start feeling when the trip begins to get you. So, of course, when I looked, for example, at the plants, I saw that they were actually breathing and talking in a certain way. But for me, what struck me the most was the beautiful images that I saw when I closed my eyes. And I was listening to a lot of, classical music, but also at that time, you have that album by Pink Floyd, On the Other Side of the Moon, On the Dark Side of the Moon. So the images I saw when I closed my eyes were out of this world. I've never seen those landscapes, those worlds. I'd never seen them anywhere, and I don't think Hollywood could ever be able to reproduce those images. So one of the things that really struck me was how time dilated. For example, 1 minute seemed like an eternity. That really was actually something that really fascinated me. But what really touched me the most was this feeling that the universe, the cosmos, felt like an organism. So, we all think that the Earth is an organism, but at that time I really felt that the whole universe was an organism, and I were just microcosmos of a larger cosmos. Of course, at that time, I didn't really know much about, the concept of what consciousness is, or the notion of what a universal mind is. But I really felt that I was connected to everything, and everything was connected to me. And also another interesting feeling was the notion of mind. I really felt that my mind extended beyond my body, you know. So I felt a little bit nervous because I said to myself, if the mind is outside my body, does this mean that I am out of my mind? So, so I was a little bit scared because there were some moments where I felt a bit afraid. But in essence, I did realize that the mind is not only in the brain. So this really sparked my interest in physics. So I say I had a mystical experience because I mean, of course, some people are very religious, some people are not religious at all. And we know that many scientists declare themselves atheist. But if you are an atheist, this means that science is your religion. And if science is your religion, that means that you're also religious. So I think it's very arrogant for many scientists, to pretend that they hold the secret to knowledge and the secret to the universe. So that really sparked my interest in physics. It was a psychedelic experience. And I have been doing research to see if there were other physicists who were interested in doing physics due to an LSD experience. And I only found one, and this is Carlo Rovelli. Carlo Rovelli is an Italian physicist, and he said that his interest in physics was sparked by an LSD experience. And he was completely fascinated also by the notion of time. How the time in the clock stopped, but not the time in his mind. The time in his mind seemed that it was completely dilated, but the clock time stopped. So Carlo Rovelli did very important work with Lee Smolin and Avi Ashtekar in developing the theory of loop quantum gravity, which is an attempt to quantize gravity in terms of loop variables and Penrose speed networks. And also he was very much interested also in what he called relational quantum mechanics, where it is the relation between the observer and the observed that one should take into account. So I'm very happy in that respect. His name is Carlo, my name is Carlos. So in a certain way, we are brothers in arms. So that was essentially my interest in. This is how I really decided to wanted to do physics. Yeah.
Your LSD experience is so much better than mine, because mine was when I was at university, all my friends decided that I wasn't allowed to have LSD because I was too crazy already. So everyone else took it, and I was in this room and all of these people were, doing their own thing. So one guy was drawing very perfect pictures of bubbles, and one guy was just like listening to the music, and somebody else, there were like 5 or 6 of them, and I was, you couldn't talk to anybody because they were all in their own worlds. And I went to the window and I noticed a flashing light, and I said, "Oh, the police are outside." I turned around, the room was empty, just like that.
Wow.
Despite being in the middle of their trips, they'd all managed to get away within
Oh, I see.
2 seconds. But
Mm. One
so,
thing I would like to say, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
no.
No, one thing, once I had an LSD experience with somebody in Santa Cruz, two British guys, and at the end of the psychedelic experience, this British guy, wanted to write in a piece of paper, oh, I figured out what the secret of life is all about. What is the secret of the universe? So he wrote it in a piece of paper. He folded the piece of paper and he said, okay, I'm going to leave it here. And when I wake up tomorrow from the LSD trip or whatever, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to look at the piece of paper and I'm going to see what I wrote. So the following day, he wakes up and he's so excited. Oh, I know what the secret of the universe is. So all of us wanted to hear it. So he opens the piece of paper, he looked at it, and the answer was yes. Anyway. So I thought that was really funny. Anyway.
That is, but that's what got you sort of engaged in studying physics, and we'll sort of shoot on to the area in which you now work as a quantum theorist. And so I'm wondering if you can explain to us some of the key findings in theoretical quantum physics, and explain them to us as lay people. I know Lorena and Francesco maybe will understand, and Gay, but many of us here really need the careful work you've done in making complex ideas simple.
Yes. Well, actually, I am a theoretical physicist. So, I mean, I had to take quantum physics and quantum field theory, like, when you do theoretical physics. So I'm not really an expert in quantum mechanics, but I did some work on Bohmian mechanics. So I was very interested in the work of David Bohm. So I'm a little bit familiar with the work of David Bohm. But my work mainly is theoretical physics, So, but let me just basically, give you, a brief survey about the history of quantum mechanics. It all started with, Max Planck. I think it was in the 1900s when he proposed that, hot surfaces radiated and absorbed energy not in a continuous manner, but in terms of discrete chunks, in discrete packets of energy. So that was a postulate that he proposed in order to solve something that was called the ultraviolet catastrophe. So essentially, he postulated that energy, you radiate photons and absorb photons in chunks, in little discrete chunks. And this is why he came with the idea of the quantum, And I was looking up that quantum in Latin, it means how much, how great, I didn't know that. But anyway, that was his postulate. And he himself admitted that it was just a postulate to be a mathematical trick in order to solve this problem. And essentially, each chunk of energy, carries an amount of energy, which is given by, the Planck constant times the frequency. So essentially, that's what each chunk of energy is the energy content of each chunk of energy. Then later on, I think it was in 1905 when Einstein thought about the idea of Planck to be able to explain something called the photoelectric effect. So, which essentially is when you shine light on a metal, the chunks of energy, the light is made out of photons, which are the discrete quanta of light. So when those photons strike the surface of a metal, they hit an electron, and if they have the right amount of energy, they are able to eject the electrons out of the metal. So this is what's called the photoelectric effect. And in fact, Einstein was awarded the Nobel Prize not for his theory of relativity, but actually for the photoelectric effect. Yeah. Then later on, I think it was Niels Bohr and Sommerfeld tried to use this idea of the quantum to explain, how the electrons revolve around the atom. So Bohr and Sommerfeld came with this idea of the atom, like when you look at the planets that are revolving around the sun, in elliptical orbits. In the model of Bohr, in order to simplify his model, he didn't say that the electrons go around in elliptical orbits, but he claimed, he thought that they would go around in circular orbits, in circles. And the radius of those orbits were not given by a continuous number, but the radius were given by discrete jumps of a fundamental radius, which is the Bohr radius. So essentially, the radius of those orbits were given by multiples of the fundamental radius, by multiples of n square. N is a natural integer, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. So when you square those numbers, they gave you the size of the orbitals compared to the fundamental radius, which is what you call the ground state of the hydrogen atom. So this is what Bohr and Sommerfeld postulated. And then I think it was in the 1920s, it was the French physicist Louis de Broglie. He is the one who came with the idea of matter being waves. So he postulated the idea that if you have a particle of a given mass, there is a wave associated to a particle, and the wavelength of that wave was essentially given by the Planck constant divided by the momentum of the particle. So, for example, if you have a macroscopic object, like the cat, for example, or the drawer, or a big refrigerator, the wavelength of that refrigerator is actually very, very small compared to the size of the refrigerator. But if you have a subatomic particle, like an electron, the wavelength associated to the electron, because the momentum is very, very small, the wavelength is very, very large compared to the size of the electron. So what happens is that, when the wavelength is large compared to your size, this is when quantum mechanical effects are more manifest than they are manifest compared to a macroscopic body. So essentially, this essentially provided like a natural barrier or line or borderline between the quantum world and the classical world. Now, what happens when the wavelength is the same size as the object? So in that case, you have like a fuzzy, you have like a coexistence between the classical world and the quantum world. It's like a fuzzy line, like a fuzzy borderline between the two. So then what happens later on, you have Heisenberg, you have Born, and then you have Kramer and Jordan came with the idea of matrix quantum mechanics. And then also it was Schrödinger, the Austrian physicist, who is the one who came up with the idea of wave mechanics. He postulated his wave equation, which is basically like a wave equation that governs the evolution of the wave function. I will explain a little bit more what the wave function is all about. And then in the 1930s, the mathematicians, it was Hilbert and von Neumann and Dirac that laid the mathematical foundations of quantum mechanics. In terms of Hilbert spaces and operators, and density matrix and all of that. So the hardcore mathematical, those are the guys who laid the mathematical foundations of quantum mechanics. But these were the basic ideas. So now I'm going to give you the quintessence of quantum mechanics, which is represented by the so-called the double slit experiment. The double slit experiment essentially is the heart of quantum mechanics, essentially. So in the double slit experiment, what you had is you have a beam of particles a beam of electrons traveling towards a barrier. So imagine you drill two holes on the barrier, like two slits, and you let the beam of electrons, the beam of particles, head towards the barrier, and you see what happens after you place a screen behind the barrier. So what the people observe, they observe the very interesting patterns on the screen that look like fringes and bands of bright and dark, bright and dark, bright and dark fringes and bands, which are characteristic of two waves interfering with each other, two waves which originate from the location of where the two holes are, of where the two slits are. So this seems very paradoxical, very, very strange, how you could observe an interference pattern on the screen when the screen was made of dots, and the dots were caused by when the particles impinge hit the screen, they created a dot. So it was very strange how those dots that occurred when the particles hit the screen. How is it possible to reconcile the idea of particles with waves, with the wave-like behavior of the interference pattern? So this is when physicists came up with the idea of wave-particle duality. So in other words, if you do not look, you have a wave, but if you look, you have a particle. So this is where the wave-particle duality emerged. So essentially, what the physicists at the time, like Niels Bohr and others, who embraced the Copenhagen interpretation, they were saying that particles do not have a location at all. They only have a location if you look at them, if you try to observe them. But intrinsically, they don't have a location. So meaning that if you don't look, you have a wave, but if you look, you have a particle. So this seems very paradoxical. So I'm sure you heard this, this analogy of if you have a tree in the forest, and if the tree falls down, and if there's no one there to listen to the tree falling, does the tree make a sound? So this created this wave particle duality. So it was, Wigner, who was a mathematician, who believed that it was the consciousness of an observer who actually actualized the transition from a wave to a particle. So this is where the work of David Bohm is very important, because David Bohm was very unhappy with this duality, this notion of duality between wave and particles. So I think it was in the 1950s where he proposed a different interpretation of quantum mechanics, which was more related to the idea of de Broglie notion of wave and particles. So according to David Bohm, he didn't want to look at the duality between waves and particles. So he said that in reality you have both. You have particles and waves at the same time. So this is when they came up with the de Broglie-Bohm pilot wave theory. So imagine you have a bunch of surfers, riding a wave in the ocean. So what you have is like the particles are riding a wave, and in the same way that the wave guides a surfer as it surfers around, the wave is the one that pilots, that guides the surfer as it moves through space. So there is something called that what David Bohm called that the velocity of each surfer, of each particle, is given by the guidance field. Essentially, what he's saying is that the velocity of each particle depends on the positions of all the other particles. In other words, the velocity of each surfer depends on the position and velocities of all the other surfers. So this is how Bohm envisioned the idea of non-locality, that everything is connected to everything else. So, when you write down the velocity of each particle in terms of what is called the guidance field, in reality, what you are doing is writing the velocity of the particle in terms of the wave function of the many particles, of the many surfers. So essentially, in Bohmian quantum mechanics, you have the first ingredient, you have this velocity in terms of the guidance field, which involves the positions of all the other observers, which is essentially non-local. The other equation is the equation which tells you how does the wave function of the many particles evolves with time. And that's essentially the Schrödinger equation for the many particle wave function. And finally, there's something called the quantum equilibrium hypothesis, which tells you that the probability density is essentially given by the absolute square of the wave function. This is this is actually what they call the Max Born rule. Because when Schrödinger came up with his wave equation, he really didn't have a physical interpretation what the wave function meant physically. So what happens is, as I said earlier, because people during the Copenhagen interpretation, they say that the particle doesn't have a position unless you measure it. So by saying that the absolute square of the wave function gave you the probability density, what they meant by probability density is that the only thing you can measure is the probability of finding the particle within an infinitesimal volume around a point, around the location of the particle. So that's why it's called probability density. It's the probability of finding a particle within an infinitesimal volume around a point. So roughly speaking, it's the probability of finding a particle at a given point. So that was the probability density was related to the square of the wave function. Now, a big mystery was, why is the wave function a complex number? And this is a very deep question that it took many years to solve. And it was a French physicist called Laurent Notal who argued that the reason the wave function is complex is because nature is fractal. The world we live in, the nature, biology, everything is fractal. So the fractal space-time really is the origin of why the wave function is a complex number. But I won't go into it. But essentially, the square of the wave function gives you the probability of finding the particle at a given location. Let me see now. Okay, so now essentially Bohm came up with three ideas. The first idea is the velocity of each particle, the velocity of each surfer is, depends on the positions of all the other observers. So he introduced the notion of non-locality in quantum mechanics, which is essential in order to be compatible with the work of John Bell. John Bell proposed the so-called Bell's inequalities, which were actually a few years ago the people who got the Nobel Prize. I think it was Alana Specht and Seilinger and other scientists. What John Bell essentially told us is that quantum mechanics is non-local, which was a big surprise to Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen. They thought that quantum mechanics should be local, but But essentially, quantum mechanics is non-local. But the idea is non-local is because in the Bohmian interpretation is that the velocity of every particle depends on the positions of all the other particles. So essentially, well, he's saying that everything in the cosmos is related to everything else. There's a connectedness. And it's a big mistake to separate entities in the universe. So this fragmentation of reality, this dualism of wave-particle duality, this dualism is very harmful. And this dualism between good versus evil, of us versus them, or if you are not with us, you are against us. This mentality has caused tremendous harm to the world. So I don't have to tell you about the wars we're living in right now. And then, okay, the second aspect is the wave, the Schrodinger equation that governs the evolution of the wave function. And the third hypothesis was the equilibrium hypothesis, that the square of the wave function gives you the probability density. Now, very recently, there's an Italian physicist called Valentini, Anthony Valentini, and he claims that the quantum world emerges from a more fundamental theory. And in his theory, he says that this quantum equilibrium hypothesis, that the wave function is square, gives you the probability density. In this more fundamental theory, the probability density is no longer equal to the square of the wave function. So according to Valentini, there is an underlying theory from which quantum mechanics emerges. So I just wanted to point that out, like by saying that a quantum theory is not the ultimate theory. And why do I say this is important? Because many of us have been trying to understand consciousness from the point of view of quantum mechanics, and perhaps quantum mechanics might not be sufficient to explain consciousness. We might need a more fundamental theory to be able to explain consciousness. So let me just go.
Sorry, I did want to sort of to ask you about consciousness. Did you want to just to I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were suggesting we moved on to the question.
Yeah. Okay, very briefly, I just would like to give you the applications of quantum mechanics are enormous. You see, the modern world today is due to quantum mechanics. We wouldn't have the high tech we live today. We wouldn't have cell phones. We wouldn't have communications. We wouldn't have anything. All of the technological wonders of today are due to quantum mechanics. So let me just briefly, summarize a few, and then we can go on. So, for example, the quantum chemistry, the chemical bonding, we wouldn't be able to understand quantum chemistry if it wasn't for quantum mechanics. We have quantum computing, superconductivity, light-emitting diodes, the laser, the transistor, semiconductors, the microprocessors, the magnetic resonance imaging, the explanations for many biological phenomena, like to understand the DNA micromolecule, superfluidity, superconductivity, also quantum computation, quantum cryptography, quantum teleportation, and most recently the link between black holes and quantum computing. Just to say a few. Okay, so then yes, if you wish, we can go now to the issue of consciousness.
Yes, and you've mentioned David Bohm and his efforts. He made efforts to incorporate ideas from quantum theories with our daily lives, moving views and minds from fragmentation to wholeness in the way that you've suggested. And I've got a quote from him here, very generously provided by Gay.
Yeah.
My scientific and philosophical work My main concern has been with understanding the nature of reality in general and consciousness in particular as a coherent whole, which is never static or complete, but which is an unending process of movement and unfoldment. And so I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on what he's saying there and give us an idea of what your understanding of consciousness is, building from that.
Yeah, well, let me just give you, since I spoke about the double slit experiment. So if you have a little bit of fantasy, you can say that you have a particle heading towards the barrier. So imagine the particle splits into two. So it's like having the particle unfolds, like an unfolding process. So the particle splits into two, and one of them goes through the upper slit, and the other one goes through the downward slit. Okay, and then before they hit the screen, the two particles that had been due to the splitting of one particle, they rejoin. So that when they rejoin is like an enfoldment, like a folding in, and they hit the screen. So this process of unfolding is like a particle splitting into two, and enfolding is like the two particles joining together to hit the screen. So that, in very simplistic terms, is what I think what unfolding and enfolding process is. Also, if you look at the fractal, for example, if you look at the Mandelbrot set, if some of you look at the Mandelbrot set, and you look at the portion of the Mandelbrot set, if you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in 100,000 times, you have all these patterns that keep unfolding and opening up like a flower, and that opens up and opens up. And after 100,000 times, you end up at the very beginning with the same pattern you started with the only difference that the scale size of the pattern is much, much smaller. But in reality, it has the same geometrical configuration. It's self-similar to what you started with. So that unfolding process ended up back to where you started. So you're back to folding in again. Okay, so you go on through this cycle. It's a process of cycle of creation and destruction, creation and destruction. Now, the idea of having a particle splitting in two, so and falling, so you have two particles falling two paths, is imagine instead of having one barrier, imagine you have many barriers instead of one. So what you're going to have is that you're going to have many splittings and many splittings. So you're going to have that one particle is going to follow many different paths before they hit the screen. So this is where Feynman got the idea of his path integral formulation of quantum mechanics. So according to Feynman, when a particle goes from point A to point B, the particle follows all paths between point A and point B. So it's like saying that the particle splits and splits and splits in many different copies of itself, and each copy of itself follows a different path. And then before they hit the screen, or before they reach the destination, the many copies of the particle rejoin, and they hit the screen. So this is where Everett came with his idea of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, the parallel universe idea, that every time you perform a measurement, the universe splits into different branches, So although there are many physicists who claim that the many worlds interpretation, the quantum multiverse has many problems, but I don't want to go into that. But what I'm and one last thing, this idea of enfolding and unfolding is like to encode something and decode something. We encode program like the DNA, and then we decode. So this is what I think. This is what I think. Okay, go ahead, please. Okay, so this is my idea of folding and unfolding. This is what I think. Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so how does that sort of mesh in with your idea of consciousness? Does that do you have the sense that consciousness is also enfolding and unfolding?
Yes. Well, I think consciousness really is not a thing. It's really a process. It's an endless process, you know. So Penrose, and Hameroff, came up with an idea of consciousness based on the notion of the microtubules. Apparently, microtubules are proteins that exist in every cell in our brains, in our bodies, in the animals, and also in the plants as well. So, according to the belief of Penrose and Hameroff, there is actually these microtubules display quantum phenomena, and which are related to the notion of the collapse of the wave function. Well, the collapse of the wave function is a very subtle concept. Essentially, what it says is that when you have a menu of possibilities, when you perform a measurement, only one possibility out of that menu of possibilities is realized, is actualized. So, in other words, in quantum mechanics, when you perform a measurement, what you are doing, you're looking at the probability for the outcome of a certain process. So you're looking at the probability of finding the particle at a given location. So you have a menu of possibilities. So when you perform a measurement, you're actually selecting one of those possibilities. So this is what is called the collapse of the wave function in technical terms, or the reduction of the state vector in quantum mechanics. So according to Penrose and Hameroff, Hameroff is somebody who worked with anesthesia. He's an anesthesiologist. And because he realized that the anesthesia did bind with these aromatic rings, he believed that due to the binding of the anesthesia to the aromatic rings, that it inhibits the quantum processes, and this is what made the patients unconscious. So the basic idea is the following. Wigner believed that consciousness is what causes the collapse of the wave function, the consciousness of the person, of the individual. But later on, he abandoned that idea. So what Penrose did is to reverse what Wigner said. So Penrose claimed that it was the opposite. It was the collapse of the wave function that causes consciousness, and not the other way around. It was not consciousness that caused the collapse of the wave function. So according to Penrose and Hameroff, they have this model, what they call the orchestrated objective reduction model, by which the microtubules they display quantum phenomena, and due to the collapse of the wave function, a conscious process emerges. And Penrose insists that this process is something which is not computable. Because computer scientists claim that consciousness is a quantum computation. But Penrose says no, that consciousness cannot be a result of an algorithm. It cannot be the result of a computation. So when the wave function collapses, you have something which is non-computable. So Penrose and Hameroff believe that when you have this collapse of the wave function that occurs in the microtubules, they believe that this is how consciousness emerges. This is their belief. This is what they believe. Yeah. Now, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I got a bit lost. Where the microtubules are in brains?
No, the microtubules exist in every cell.
In every cell?
In every cell, not only in the human brain, but in our bodies, but also in animals and in plants. So they are proteins that are made of what they call tubulins. I don't know that much. Tubulins molecules, and they look like tubes. That's why they call it microtubules, because they look like tubes. So they're essentially proteins, and they exist in every cell, in animals, in plants, and in us. Yeah.
In living cells?
In
Or
living cells, not only brains, but also animals and plants. Yeah, yeah.
so not in like my wooden table?
No, no. Essentially plants, animals, and us.
Okay.
So what they call living matter, and plants are living matter. So plants are conscious, animals are conscious, we are conscious. Yeah, yeah. Now I don't know what consciousness is. For me, I can feel. I can have a feeling what consciousness is, but I don't. For me, I don't really know what it is. So let me give you another example. For the past 60 years, people have been working on string theory, but nobody knows what string theory is. After 60 years, nobody knows what string theory is. And what do I mean by that? Is that we don't know what is the physical foundation of string theory. We know that the theory of general relativity was based on the principle of equivalence and the principle of general covariance. But we really don't know what string theory is, because people believe that string theory was a theory of strings. But later we found out that string theories also involve higher dimensional extended objects, like a membrane, which is a two-dimensional extended object, like a lamp, which is a three-dimensional extended object, and so forth. So what we thought was a theory of strings are no longer a theory of strings, but they are theory or higher dimensional extended objects. So actually, I think it was last year, there was a big conference here in Santa Barbara. Well, actually, a workshop for 4 months at the Institute of Theoretical Physics in Santa Barbara, devoted to what is string theory. And after 4 months of the workshop, we still don't know what string theory is. So now, if you ask me what consciousness is a more difficult question, And I remember when they asked Ed Witten at Princeton, Ed Witten is the guru of physics. He's the guru of theoretical physics for many, many decades, because he has an incredible mathematical ability. And I remember when they asked him once about consciousness, and he said that he believes that it is a mystery. It is really a mystery that maybe our brains, we are not equipped to solve that question. So for me, I think it's a mystery. But going back to my psychedelic experience, I think when I talk about the universe being an organism, people who work in computer science and artificial intelligence and even neuroscientists, they believe that the universe is a quantum computer. And they believe that the universe is nothing but a simulation by a quantum computer. But I don't really think it is a simulation. No, I think it's something deeper than that. And speaking about simulation, in 1973, I think there was a German filmmaker called Fassbinder. Fassbinder was a very German filmmaker. He made a film called The World in a Wire. And in this film, I think it lasted 3 hours, you had a simulation inside the simulation, inside the simulation, inside the simulation, like a fractal. And sure enough, Hollywood, 20 years later, made the movie Matrix, which was based on the German film the world in a Wire, because Hollywood likes to copy many things. So there are many people, hardcore computer scientists, who believe that the universe is a simulation. I personally don't think the universe is a simulation, because then you're going to ask, okay, it's a simulation by a quantum computer, but then you will ask, and who made the quantum computer? And then somebody will say, well, the aliens and so forth. I do believe in a certain way in how you say, intelligent design? Is that the word that you use? Because I remember I wanted to tease a friend of mine who's a hardcore scientist. He's a physicist, biologist, philosopher, and he's a hardcore scientist. And I really wanted to tease him. And I told him once that I believed in intelligent design.
Mhm.
And he was absolutely shocked when I said that. He could not believe I said something like that. So he looked at me and he asked me, designed by whom? So I answered, by the monkeys. Anyway, so I really don't know what consciousness is. I think it's a very, very, very difficult question. I think for me, I think it's also a mystery. Although the Penrose's Hameroff model of consciousness based on the collapse of the wave function. By the way, the collapse of the wave function is due to quantum gravitational effects. According to Penrose, it is quantum gravitational effects which cause the collapse of the wave function.
But even if that's what causes it,
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of just like, oh well, an emergent thing out of a load of neurons together with electrical impulses. It still doesn't explain anything, really, does it?
And well, no, because now, especially people, the string theories, they are now talking about the emergence of space-time, that even space-time emerges. But of course, the Buddhist philosophers, the Hindu mystics, they believe that everything emerges from consciousness, that space-time itself emerges from consciousness. So now going back to David Bohm, you see the heart of David Bohm's work is the quantum potential. So let me just briefly explain where Bohm got the idea of the quantum potential, because this is very important, I think. You see, when David Bohm looked at the Schrödinger equation, which is based on the wave function with a complex number. So what Bohm did is he broke the complex number into what you call the norm of a complex number and the phase of the complex number. You see, a complex number basically has two components. For example, when you look at the needle of a clock, the needle has a certain length. That's the norm of the complex number. And the needle makes an angle with respect to the horizontal axis. So that's what is called the phase of the complex number. So when Bohm split the wave function of Schrödinger equation into the norm and the phase, he arrived at something very interesting. He basically arrived at an equation which is very similar to happens in classical mechanics, but there was an extra term, an extra mysterious term that he called the quantum potential, an extra term. But you see, the quantum potential has a geometrical explanation, that I was very interested for many, many years. And it happens that the mathematical expression of David Bohm's quantum potential is really nothing else and nothing more than the scalar curvature of space-time. There was a mathematician called Hermann Weyl who wanted to extend the Riemannian geometry by essentially introducing the notion of a gauge field. But basically what I'm saying, in this Weyl geometry, what happens is when you transport one object from one place to another, the size of the object changes. So there was something that Weyl introduced, which is called the Weyl gauge field, which calibrates basically how the size of the objects change. More importantly, there was something which has to do with the clock effect. If you have a clock, sitting at your desk, as if there's a dial gauge field, if this gauge field is dynamical, what is going to happen is that the rate at which your clock ticks will change. In other words, this gauge field essentially governs how fast or how slow time flows. But in any case, if you look at the mathematical expression of Bohm's quantum potential, it really has the same mathematical form as the scalar curvature in a vial spacetime. And actually, I learned that from an Italian experimentalist when I was visiting my sister in Berkeley in 1984. There was an Italian experimentalist who was a postdoc in Berkeley, and he used to teach quantum mechanics in Napoli, in Italy. And his name is Enrico Santamato, and he's an experimentalist. He's not a theorist, but when he was learning a little bit about vial geometry, he realized that the expression for the vial curvature looked very similar to the expression of David Bohm's quantum potential. So, and essentially what's going on is that the geometry is tied up with quantum mechanics. So for decades, people who have been trying to quantize gravity, quantize geometry, they essentially missed an essential point, that maybe what we have to do is, instead of quantizing geometry, what we need to do is to geometrize quantum mechanics, the opposite. So the mysterious quantum potential of David Bohm is nothing else but nothing more but the curvature of the vial space-time. So essentially, in very simple words, is the following. Einstein told us that any form of matter and energy is going to distort the fabric of space-time. It's going to curve space-time. So what I was thinking many years ago, before I met Santamato, was that the probability density itself also curves space-time. The probability of something happening is also going to distort space-time and endow space-time with a curvature. And when I met Santamato, I was very, very surprised, because he's the one who told me that precisely the mysterious Bohm quantum potential was nothing else and nothing more the curvature of vial space-time, which is the space-time which you need precisely to explain how fast and how slow time flows. So I remember when I was in Austin in 1984, I discussed this with John Wheeler, and at that time, and he thought that it might be a mathematical coincidence. He said, Carlos, this could be just a mathematical coincidence. Yes, because he told me that Einstein was not very happy with the work of Weil, because apparently if you have a vial space-time, what happens is going to mess up the quantum clocks. It's going to alter the spectral lines of quantum clocks. So Einstein was, essentially he disagreed with Weil's idea. But there are cases where there's something called integral biogeometry, where you can avoid the so-called clock effect that you can have in biogeometry. But in any case, I believe that we should geometrize quantum mechanics at the same time that we are quantizing geometry. We should do also geometrize quantum mechanics. So maybe this also fits with Bohm's idea that we don't have this duality between particles and waves. We should consider both of them. Yeah.
As well as the work that you do, as a theoretical physicist, you also co-edited a book on science's subtle and not so subtle ways of, I suppose, censorship, which shapes the world. And I
Yes.
was just wondering, out of, there's so many ideas that you've brought up here, and for someone like me, it can be quite difficult to understand how those ideas could or would be censored, because to me it seems as if these views are all adding to a great store of knowledge, or a great store of hypotheses and theories and areas for further research. But it seems as if there is a community which finds some ideas more acceptable than others. And is that what you have found in your work?
Well, before, let me just briefly mention something about David Bohm and Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was extremely critical of David Bohm. David Bohm was ostracized by the physics community. And one of the reasons, I think Oppenheimer had a lot to do with it. And Oppenheimer
got him listed on the continent. He got him kicked out of the country.
yes, he had
And
to go to
Princeton,
Brazil.
he lost his job at Princeton.
Yes, he had to go to Brazil. So what Oppenheimer said is, if we cannot disprove Bohm, we must choose to ignore him. So that was what Oppenheimer said about Bohm. Yeah. So speaking about censorship in science, what happens is that you're dealing with very intelligent people, especially physicists, but they have humongous egos. And they can be very, very nasty. So I was, myself, I was blacklisted by the archives, which is a repository of preprints where everybody can post the preprints before they are published in journals in the internet. So I was blacklisted in 2002, 2003, which was extremely detrimental. But I was not the only person who was blacklisted, but it was a plethora of other scientists who think outside the box and also were blacklisted. But thanks to God that, in the past years, other outlets have emerged where we can post our work in the internet. For example, there is academia.edu or ResearchGate or Bixra, So there are other places where now we could post our work. But the archives is essentially, it's like the Google of physics, the Google of science. So yes, scientists, because in science you have a pecking order. So you have somebody like the Pope, in a certain way you can say that Ed Witten is the Pope. Then you have the cardinals, you have the bishops, and everybody else, So, and also one of the main reasons is the competition for money, the competition for funding. So it is a very cutthroat profession, And also because, sometimes people are really not nice to each other. That's essentially the point, So yeah, so go ahead.
Do you think
please.
there are some ideas that we're just not ready to hear? I'm thinking to a certain extent, I don't know if you've read, it's a very slim novel by, I think he's a Spanish writer, Benjamin Labutut. Yes.
From Argentina.
From Argentina, yes.
Yeah, he wrote about von Neumann, how nasty
Yes.
von Neumann was. Yeah,
he wrote that one, but there's another one, the one that came after that, because that's called The Maniac, I think. And the one that comes after it involves 4 or 5 different thinkers. Schrödinger, I think, is one of them, and there's a mathematician and various different people, but it's not the von Neumann book. And each of these people gets to a point at which they have understood so much that they can't continue. They reject the knowledge, they push back from it. So he's, in that novel, he's kind of suggesting that there is a point beyond which, like you were saying, the mystery, a point beyond which the human mind just can't go. And that's one thing. And I'm wondering whether there's also places where society doesn't want to go on a different level.
Well, when we look at the world today, essentially, it is a very sick world that we are living in. Absolutely. Look, at the war in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East, in India and Pakistan. I don't know how many wars we have had in the past century. So I don't know. Maybe we were designed by the evil monkeys. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, it's such a complex issue. For example, somebody asked me, Carlos, if you only had 5 minutes to talk to the whole planet, to the whole 8 billion people, what would you tell them? And my God, what could I tell the world? So, stop killing each other, and start loving each other. What else could I tell them? It's so complex.
It is.
Yeah.
And when you think, because I know you also have a great fondness for other than humans. I know one of Gay's dogs, who sadly is no longer with us, was a particular favorite of yours. But so you love animals and perhaps trees, plants as well. And I wonder how much your understanding and the way that you think, the science and the theories that you have studied, do they change your relationship with other than humans?
Well, I know, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think animals obviously have souls, and anybody who has owned a pet understands perfectly well how they can read your emotions. They can really sense your vibrations and know if you are sad or happy. Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, Gay had a wonderful Saint Bernard, Liam. That it was such a lovely dog. I really loved that dog. Yeah. In Colombia, when I was growing up, I had a monkey, Rene Bubu, and I had a parrot, a guacamaya, which is a large bird. And I have dogs here in Santa Barbara. No, absolutely no. Dogs can really sense you. So they are absolutely soulful spirits. Undoubtedly, yeah. Undoubtedly, yeah.
I'm going to I'm encourage those of you who are listening to start putting your hands up or typing your messages into the chat. But I'm going to hand over to Ms. Bradshaw, because I know that she has both great understanding and great interest in the topics we're discussing, and it would be remiss not to let her have her say.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll just say a few things. I think when you were talking about Valente, the idea that there's something underneath the quantum theory and quantum research, etc. I mean, to me, that has so much meaning. In other words, in a sense, all the listing that all the things that quantum mechanics has enabled, quote unquote, us to do. To me, it's a great lesson in the sense of to not stop and say, well, what can we do with this? Valente, what you were saying is it's kind of like the Matryoshka dolls. You open one up, and to me, that's a great lesson, is to be curious, to wonder, but be less obsessed with knowing an answer. And then to me that also relates to this whole series, and having you speak about quantum mechanics, and the next time is Pim van Lommel, who's talking about the continuity of consciousness after death. To me, it's less important at all to even say what is consciousness. The idea of this series has been to dislodge people who are just content with the material world, even if there's great compassion for non-humans, but to sort of use peripheral vision to dislodge from the needing to know, and to know there's mystery that that we don't there doesn't always have to be a reason. I guess that's the whole point. There doesn't always have to be a reason. And when you were discussing at the beginning your LSD trips, it's that whole notion of, wow, there's a lot more. And so the whole idea, in my opinion, is it's not so much of what consciousness is or isn't. It's the fact that there's something other than meets the eye. You know what I mean? And that is really, I think, very humble. So when you're telling the world, it's saying, just be more humble. Have humility and understand that there is, like your own experience. There's more to life than what we suppose. That sounded like more of a statement, but it actually has a question mark at the end.
No, but sometimes I think that in a certain way, knowledge is finite, but ignorance is infinite. And I think Einstein also, he had an expression, he said, the greater the circle of knowledge, the larger the perimeter of darkness. So, the more I know, the more I realize how much I don't know. Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So I guess this is what I think it was Donald Rumsfeld said, the unknown. He was playing with the words. There is the known unknown. For example, there are many problems in mathematics that have not been solved. So you can call that the known unknown. But there is the unknown. So there are many, I guess in 100 years from now, the mathematicians will be working on problems that today we had no idea what those problems are going to be. So I guess this is what you call the unknown. So yeah, so I think essentially we are very limited. We have to be aware of our limitations, absolutely.
And
So
one thing I think what that you've touched on too is, and of course, why I have a great feeling for David Bohm is just who he was. He was a beautiful, kind, warm person who was content enough to be able to reach out to find out different ideas and different views for the purpose of, quote unquote, making a better world, the way you talked about it, stop killing, stop separation. And so to me, what you described, and also David Bohm, who really made a point of articulating things, from the quanta to the refrigerator, in the sense of, just his, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say his outrage, but his total reluctance to talk about the duality of the wave particle, to me, speaks so deeply of his moral and ethical commitment.
Oh yeah. I remember in some of his interviews, he definitely talks about how we're destroying the environment, and about how the conflicts between people and people, between husband and wife, brother and brother and sister, among all of us. So he emphasized that, absolutely, and mainly due to this idea of fragmentation, of separateness. Absolutely, yes. Yeah, one thing also I would like to say about David Bohm is that, you see, many scientists, for example, in textbooks about quantum mechanics, they don't teach David Bohm. You see, because many scientists, they said, well, David Bohm's work cannot be extended to the relativistic domain. In other words, David Bohm's work is not compatible with special relativity, because if you have this non-locality, you cannot reconcile relativity with non-locality. But this is not true. In the past decades, many people have been able to find relativistic extensions of David Bohm's mechanics. And furthermore, they also have been able to formulate quantum field theories in terms of Bohmian quantum mechanics. So if you listen to many critics of David Bohm today, if you listen to many YouTube videos, they say, well, David Bohm is incomplete because it's incompatible with relativity. It doesn't provide quantum field theory, which is essential to understand the standard model of particle physics. But this is not true. Bohmian quantum mechanics has been extended to relativity and also to quantum field theory. People can just look up the literature. David Bohm gave a seminar when I was in Austin, I remember, and I wanted to talk to him about this interpretation of his quantum potential with the Wiles scalar curvature, but I couldn't speak to him because there were so many people around him, so I didn't have a chance to talk to him, unfortunately. So I really regret not being able to tell him that. Then I learned from Basil Hiley that Bryce DeWitt, who was also in Texas, a professor in Texas, when he was in France, also came up with the idea that the quantum potential was related to the curvature of space-time. And I didn't know that, unfortunately, until recently, until Basil Haley pointed that out also. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I was in brief correspondence with Basil Hiley, who he was a co-author and colleague of David Bohm for the others, and both, and you know that from the Bear book with Charlie Russell, the Bear person, and Basil Hiley. They both talked about, he was actually raised in India. He's English. He was raised in India. Both David Bohm and Charlie Russell, the Bear person, but David Bohm and Basil Hiley, which I found really significant. Their involvement with physics, really was organic, in a sense where they experienced what they were doing as children, and I have in the Bear book, a description of it's, I've forgotten who was interviewing him, David Bohm, and he describes about when he was walking across a stream and Charlie did the same thing. Anyways, he talks about the whole, the physicality. In other words, he felt what he was doing mathematically. And Basil Hiley said the same thing, that his, that's what he experienced as a child growing up in India. And I think that's the reason I'm bringing that up, is because I think it's a really important point for people who are not, scholars like you and your colleagues, in physics, and mathematics of that kind, that seem arcane and not particularly germane to, the problems at hand. And I think it's really important to understand that they are in multitudinous ways.
Well, what we think creates reality. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. One thing about this folding and unfolding, there's this notion of hollow movement of the whole. I think also David Bohm talks about the hologram. When you have a hologram, a portion of the image gives you the image of the whole. So if you look at a photographic plate of a hologram, when you look at a piece of the image, that it contains the image of the whole. So essentially, so you have this folding and folding. So we are essentially, you and I are a hologram of the whole universe, you can say that. The microcosmos is a hologram of the whole universe. So you and I are a hologram of this, of the whole universe. Absolutely, yeah.
And again, I said it, but I wanted to, sorry, Izzy, I'll just say real
Just,
short.
I've seen Fernando's had his hand up for a while, and I just thought it might be nice to let him speak before you go on.
I'm sorry, Fernando, I'll just say one thing real short. And it's mainly that I just sort of really wanted to emphasize is that, again, the purpose of this discussion is to encourage people who are not necessarily involved in those fields at all, your field, Carlos, to be more expansive in terms of their view of the world. And in particular, a lot of people who are associated with us are, interested in, helping quote unquote animals and plants and the earth. And so to me, it's so important to be really inclusive of this larger picture and understanding. Sorry, Fernando, it's all yours.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry you don't see my face.
Fernando, hola, ¿qué
Yeah,
tal?
Fernando, how are you?
¿Cómo estás? ¿Cómo estás?
We are a large number of observers in this meeting, but
Yes.
the probability you see me is none because
Yeah.
my camera doesn't work.
Okay.
But you can hear me, right?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, yes.
All right. No, I want to take advantage of this meeting to say hello to you.
Gracias.
You
Yeah.
have mentioned my name in the
Yes.
beginning of your presentation,
Yes.
and
at the end too.
yeah, yeah. So for everyone there, we know each other from many years ago. We met for the first time in Madrid. We were seekers or explorers, and he's become a scientist and become a theologist.
Yes.
So when you talk about the consciousness, we have a word for this, but in the end, it's a mystery for scientists, philosophers, and theologians. I understand that for scientists to pronounce the word God is prohibited, not allowed. But there's a superior consciousness and intelligence beyond ourselves that we have to be conscious that it exists. So, but in the end, I just wanted to say hello to you, and I hope you can come back to give another conference in Madrid soon. All right,
In
Carlos?
Madrid. I'll do it live and we can trip together again.
Nice trip, a nice trip together.
Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. Wonderful to hear you. Yeah.
All right.
I wondered, Fernando, did the LSD have the same impact? So it encouraged Carlos to become a physicist. Did it encourage you to move towards theology? Did it have that effect on you?
Yes. When he was mentioning before his experience, it goes exactly as I had together 50 years ago. The feeling of being like an energy, like I had one of the trips was very impacting me because I noticed I was a being without form, without image, without body, but with identity. And I was conscious that I was part of a big consciousness. So the individual consciousness is part of the big consciousness. I realized in that time this view, this understanding that was beyond me, but I started my life of exploring among religions, among philosophers, among practices, among beliefs, and I'm still there.
Thank you so much. Thank you for explaining that. And what is your what as a theologian, is that in the academic world or in or within a particular church or discipline?
Well, during my life, I've been in the business life. I was in the commercial area of different industries. But once I retired, now I'm just a theologist and theologian practicing meditation in groups of meditation, basically. I'm preparing a trip to India again next month to stay in an ashram practicing the conscious meditation by the Hinduism.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Fernando is the Spanish Donald Trump.
Why do you mean that?
No, because you went into theology, and Trump posted himself as the Pope.
Oh yeah. I saw him.
Yeah.
I noticed in the chat a couple of particularly interesting comments rather than questions, and I just wondered, Sunny, if you were there, the comment that you made was interesting. I don't know if you'd like to mention it yourself or if I should read it out.
I'm not sure if my audio is working, is it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure which comment you were talking about because I made a few, unfortunately.
The one about the state machine, I thought that
Oh
was...
yeah. So I've worked at Microsoft for decades, and I have some patents around AI. And I found it very interesting when you were talking about your brain not holding much. I actually had a nervous breakdown when I was coming up with that patent because I was trying to envision all of these different vectors that you go through when you're going through the math to create an AI system that I was working on at the time.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
My thing about consciousness is I envision consciousness kind of like we're all choosing, and we're all choosing from all these possibilities coming into one funnel. And it's sort of like a needle. I imagine it like a needle on the record, right? The record is all the possibilities. The needle is the point in time of now, and all of us choosing that point is what's laying down the reality that persists behind us in time. And I think of the state machine as the universe is the state machine. So everything records its current state. Basically, everything is a record of the current state. There's a possibility of that state changing at any moment in time, and we're influencing that state to change. And that's the way I look at it. So a state machine, if you're not familiar with computer science, is basically, if you think about a database and everything that we see has information, it's basically information. And because it is physical, that's just part of its state. It's physical versus imaginary. And so it is just a constant state machine, which is recording state and changing state. And I also think that after a certain amount of time, if no one's observed it for so long and it has no connection to keeping reality state the way that it is, that state can be recycled, and maybe that somehow feeds into black holes and quantum computing. So I'm really interested in quantum computing. So, and there you have it. That's my personal theory, and I've been thinking about that for a long time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes. Well, I mean, many of us have this image that we are all rivers of consciousness flowing into a sea of larger consciousness, and then the sea, it evaporates, and it makes clouds, and then it rains, and then it cycles back and forth. Yeah. And going back to artificial intelligence, it is true that airplanes can fly like birds, but airplanes don't have consciousness as far as I know. But birds do have consciousness, and airplanes crash. Birds do not crash unless they fall in love. Anyway, I just wanted to show that. Yeah.
I think of consciousness as we can choose what we observe, whereas things that are physical, they're stuck observing what they've already been observed. So for me, that's the difference. You can choose what you observe, and that's consciousness.
Okay. Thank you, Sunny. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And Erica made an interesting comment as well. Erica, if you're there, I'd love it if you would tell the group about the experiments going on about non-speaking people.
Hi.
Hi, Erica.
Yeah. So, I shared the first video I shared was about a recent discovery in quantum space-time, and I shared it with one of my friends, who then shared me those telepathic tape videos that you're referring to, that comment. And as I started listening to the audio tapes, that's what they're called, there's the people, I don't know their actual disease, but they can't speak. And their parents are told by doctors that they're not conscious or aware or any of that. But there are some schools that are more educated about them and eventually are able to teach them to use like an iPad to talk with letters and start typing. They could start learning to type. Each episode kind of goes deeper and deeper into the experiments. But like the first tape is very simple, where the daughter is able to know what the mom is thinking, or that she's given a flashcard with a word on it, and there's no possible way that the non-speaker sees the card or anything. And like all these experiments in each tape, the non-speaker is able to say exactly what's being seen or written or thought of, like even a random page in a book. I think it was the third episode that got really interesting, and they spoke on how all the non-speakers can communicate with each other, even in different zip codes, that there's a place that they go in their mind and they're able to communicate with each other. And they're even able to teach each other more about it. Some of them are more telepathic than others. It seems like the more deep the person is in their disease, the more they're able to, they're better at being telepathic. But it seems like all the experiments, they're always 100% correct in their answers and responses with the question on what the number is on the card. They could be in different rooms. So I suggest you guys listen to those audio tapes. There's only 10 episodes. I've only made it to episode 5 so far, and it's just getting super deep. And I think the last episode I watched was suggesting that even objects have consciousness, like a rock. One of the non-speakers collects rocks and talks about how there's these energies coming off the different types of rocks, and it kind of rejuvenates him, the energies from the rocks. And these are non-speaker people that most schools think they are not even conscious at all. And even the parents, some of the parents started believing that their child wasn't aware. And then a miracle happens where the child is able to let their mom know telepathically that they are aware. And then the mom started researching and finding these people doing these experiments and stuff. It's just super intense. I'm not used to communicating with others, so I hope you guys watch it because it's super intense.
Erica, you explained that so well. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you explaining it to us as well as writing it in the chat. Carlos, sorry.
I was going to say about Brian Josephson, who won a Nobel Prize very young, in England, actually, for the Josephson injection. For many, many years, he's been interested in the mind, brain, matter, telepathy. And unfortunately, he has been shunned by many members of the scientific community, but he's very, very much interested in telepathy and paranormal effects. So, of course, I think there's some sort of quantum entanglement going on that allows us to have telepathy. Absolutely. In other words, we can exchange information telepathically due to quantum entanglement. Absolutely. I think that's possible. Yeah.
I'd like to also say that in one of the episodes, they said they don't really like to use the word telepathic because the non-speaker is suggesting that they're not reading each other's mind. Somehow they're reading objects' consciousness. I don't know. It's like super weird. They're like trying to say it's not that they're reading their mind. It's that they could see through their eyes or see everything at once. So you guys should listen to it. Seriously.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just added there, and it's very different. Non-speaking autistic person, Mel Baggs, who made a video in my language, and it's quite phenomenal and sort of shifts understanding regarding non-speaking autistic people. Anne, do you want to mention your comment verbally?
Yeah, my career was spent in trying to support people who are labeled with, when I started mental retardation, and it has gone through a whole bunch of different iterations to I guess, neurodivergence at this point, but we were taught to see people with cognitive differences as being very much less than the rest of us. And yet, when we spend time together, I found people having all kinds of intelligences that I could barely comprehend, but found some, often, not always, but often found some ways to sense into a relationship where we got to get each other, I don't know, experience different things, and that people would, in fact, be able to talk with me differently than they did with lots of other people. And I believe it's one of the things that drew me to attending to the More Than Human World series, because it had to do with the way that I was attending to people. Not that I had any sort of different skill, but that I saw the person. And because I saw them, they would see me and begin to have conversation. And so I would have conversations with people who they might say some words, but not very many. But we'd get into conversations about politics and about the way that they were treated in their communities, or the things that they were really interested in, what their dreams were. And sometimes the people who knew them really well, like family, would say, yes, that's true. Other times it would be like, where did you get that? And yet it's very hard to describe, very hard to describe. So things would happen, like someone, like a psychologist would tell me, well, that person won't talk to you for more than 5 minutes because they have, such difficulty. And 3 hours later, we're having this conversation. And we might have to use a set of cards where they would pull out images that could be part of the conversation to help me understand, because we didn't both speak English. Or I don't know. Again, it's hard to describe, but I know it was real, and that the form of attention has an enormous amount to do with who we see and then how we are able to communicate with them. And it wasn't until very recently that I figured out, oh, that's true with non-humans. That's true with plants, right? Like why did it take so long to figure out? And I certainly had hints of it with animals more so than plants, but of course this would be true. So I just wanted to throw that in. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if anyone else has any further questions, but yeah, thank you, Anne. I wonder if there's something in sort of Sunny's idea of, nudging the needle of that record just along another groove, if we're all attending to beings other than sort of Homo economicus, maybe. If I don't know if anyone has any other questions, I can't see anything more in the chat at the moment. So I'm going to let Gay have the last word to Carlos, especially because unfortunately I have to feed a cat. So I'll just disappear for a moment while I see if Gay has another word for Carlos.
Well, probably too many words, but Carlos, I leave it to you. Are there some things that you'd like to add or summarize with?
Yeah, oh my God, there's so much. We could speak for 10 more hours. 10 more hours, yes. The next time I had the opportunity, I can talk a little bit about, this work I done on non-inertial relativity, maybe later, at a later time. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Oh.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Carlos. It's been really wonderful to hear from you today and I've learned so much. And everyone here sharing their thoughts. Thank you guys so much for being here and taking the time.
Thank you.
I
was a little bit tired because I didn't sleep much because I go to bed very late. So I hope I was able to make sense
It was wonderful. Very, very clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Just so everyone knows, our next Living One speaker will be 1 week from today on May 16th, back at our usual time of 10 a.m. Pacific time. As we mentioned earlier, we will be welcoming Pin Van Lommel, a cardiologist doing full-time research on the main mind-brain relation. He started his research on near-death experiences in survivors of cardiac arrest in 1986 and has since authored over 20 articles, 1 book, and many chapters about NDE. If you enjoy Living One and feel called to support Kerulos, Living One, and all of our sanctuary residents, please consider donating at the link on our website, kerulos.org. For those of you who have not already joined our Living One course companion for this series, you're still welcome to do so. We have a number of gatherings coming up. Please go to our website again to learn more about that or to enroll, kerulos.org. You can also contact us at contact@kerulos.org if you have any questions. We also meet every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific time for Vital Breath with Earth, a silent meditation gathering where you can practice attending and encountering and all the things we're talking about here today. So hopefully you guys will join us for that as well. But in the meantime, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time with us. And Carlos, again, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful. So look forward to seeing you all next week.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Okay. Okay, so I'll be able to take a nap now. I'll be able to go to sleep.
You can.
Yes. So how was it? You think it was?
Oh, you did an absolutely incredible job of sort of you managed to get through so much material as well. And I really appreciated that. And you could see by the fact of, different people coming out with different questions, you managed to inspire a lot of different
I'm glad. I'm very glad. Yeah.
And you are always, well, I've only spoken to you twice, but a totally charming person. So it's an absolute delight for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So for you, it must be 10 o'clock already in the UK. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yes.
So yes, one of my cats screams at me if I don't feed him when he demands. So I just had to run off and give him a little bit of nourishment. But I'm going to let you go off to now, and so many huge thanks. When we have the recording, we'll make sure we send you a direct link to it. So
sure. And happy Victory Day.
Thank you very much. Gosh, yes. Yes, indeed. There have been a lot of flags around.
Okay. Yeah. So we stay in touch, huh?
Yes, definitely.
And I'll let my friends about it. I will make sure to remind them about the next talk. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So
Carlo.
have a good evening. Yes, I'm going to take a nap now. Okay.
Hasta luego.
Okay. Fernando, hasta luego.
He's gone.
Yes. Ciao.